6 hours into playing Battlefield and you run out of ammo in your clip and we ask you for $1 to reload, you're really not very price sensitive at that point in time.
Now, the voice you just heard comes from the former CEO of EA, John Riccitiello, and that was from an earnings call with investors where he openly admits to one of the many psychological tricks used to generate billions of dollars for his company. See, $73 billion, that's how much microtransactions generated in 2023. And if the market continues to trend upwards, experts forecast that the gaming industry will see $121 billion generated by 2028. All shocking numbers to hear, considering the internet claims to hate microtransactions, but clearly someone is buying something. But what if I told you clicking purchase on your favorite game was more of an experiment in psychology than just a simple transaction? An experiment quietly implemented into our game so well that it makes you wonder if your gaming habits could be orchestrated by unseen manipulation tactics. On today's video, I'm exposing several key psychological triggers game studios use to manipulate players into spending more than they actually intended. And once you recognize these patterns, you'll be shocked at how often you actually fall for them. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the dark psychology of microtransactions. You remember when you bought a game and that was just it? You popped the cartridge in or loaded the CD and everything the developers created was right there at your fingertips. There were no extra downloads, no season passes, no prompts asking you to spend just a little bit more for that cool sword or outfit. Those days feel like ancient history now, but they really weren't that long ago. See, back in the 90s and early 2000s, the model was straightforward. You paid your 50 or 60 at GameStop, you went home with your shiny game box, and that was the entire transaction. Games had to be complete experiences right out of the box because there was no internet pipeline to deliver extra content later. Developers had one shot to impress you, and they packed their games with as much content as possible to justify that upfront price tag. But something fundamentally shifted in the gaming industry around the mid-2000s, but that transformation didn't happen overnight. It was more like a slow, calculated experiment just to see how much players would accept, and it turns out we accepted a lot. The turning point that most gaming historians point to happened in 2006 with what seems almost laughably innocent by today's standards. Bethesda released what was called Horse Armor DLC for Elder Scrolls Oblivion, which is literally just a cosmetic outfit for your in-game horse that cost $2.50. Players were outraged at the time. They called it a ridiculous cash grab for something so minor, but the most interesting thing about this incident is the fact that everyone claimed to be upset, but y'all still bought it in secret. In a most recent interview with PC Gamer, Skyrim's lead dev Bruce Naismith is on record saying, "Microsoft and Bethesda were caught flat-footed to the response of this. We didn't anticipate this at all. In fact, only in hindsight could it be seen that that's not what people wanted and that we basically thumbed our nose at them without even realizing it." And despite being very angry about the whole thing, players still forked over a whole bunch of money for that horse armor. Bruce is also on record saying, "Horse armor sold in the millions. It had to be millions. Though we can't recall the exact number, that was kind of a head shaker for us. You were making fun of it, yet you buy it." I think what Bruce is trying to say is, y'all did a good job looking mad, but the reality is that y'all need to
stop the cap.
Little do we know, this was just the tip of a massive iceberg that would fundamentally transform how games were made. What's fascinating is that while Western gamers were complaining about horse armor, game companies were watching developments in places like South Korea, where companies like Nexon had been pioneering microtransaction models since the late 90s. These Asian markets had already discovered that players would pay small amounts of money for benefits like lag-free servers or decorative items, which created a completely different business model than the one-and-done purchase. So by 2005, even major players like Microsoft were already plotting their strategy. Xbox corporate VP Jay Allard was quoted saying they would let it play out in the market, which is a telling statement about the experimental approach companies were taking just to see how much microtransaction revenue they could extract from players. But the real watershed moment came a few years later when Team Fortress 2 came out. See, when Valve transitioned the game to free-to-play with microtransactions in late 2010, they saw their player base explode by 500%, with 20 to 30% of those players engaging with their loot box system. The message to publishers was crystal clear. This model was making way more money than just selling a complete game for $60. And what we've witnessed since has been a complete reversal of the original gaming business model. Instead of creating a product that costs a set amount, companies now develop ongoing platforms designed to extract continuous revenue streams through small repeated purchases. And the numbers tell the story. PC gaming microtransactions more than doubled from $8 billion in 2012 to $22 billion just 5 years later in 2017. That kind of explosive growth gets the attention of executives and shareholders real quick. I mean, when you take a look at modern games side by side side with their predecessors from 15 to 20 years ago, the difference is jarring. Take a look at the original Halo. You bought it once, you got the complete campaign, multiplayer modes, all the weapons and the maps were included. Nothing was held back for a battle pass or a seasonal update. Now compare that to modern shooters where the base game is just an entry point to a complex ecosystem of battle passes, character skins, weapon blueprints, and timed limited events, all designed to keep you spending. Or take a look at sports games like the early Madden NFL titles versus today's version. The original games included all the teams, players, and modes right out of the box. Today's equivalent has Ultimate Team mode, which is built around card packs that players can purchase with real money and a never-ending quest to build their dream team. It's literally the same game year after year, but with additional ways to spend beyond that initial $70. I mean, the financial pressure behind the shift is real. Game development costs has skyrocketed. Even back in the early mobile gaming era, a game like SimCity for phones cost around $500,000 to develop. A far cry from the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars that AAA titles cost today. Publishers needed to find ways to generate more revenue, and the microtransaction model provided the perfect solution. Although, here's some food for thought, I also think making smaller, less expensive, and more experimental games is a solution as well to lower your overhead. Just some food for thought, but you know, back to the topic at hand. And the topic at hand is microtransactions, which, funny enough, started off as simple downloadable content, but evolved into sophisticated systems engineered to maximize players' spending opportunities. That initial outcry over horse armor seems quaint now that we're in this era where some games have microtransactions exceeding $100 for a single item, battle passes that reset every couple months, and daily shop rotations designed to trigger FOMO. But the most concerning aspect isn't that games cost more now, it's how this monetization shift has fundamentally changed game design itself. Games are increasingly being built around monetization systems rather than monetization just being added to support good games. I'm talking progression systems, difficulty curves, and reward structures, all carefully crafted not to deliver the most fun experience, but to create more opportunities for players to spend money. And they did this carefully by crafting psychological hooks. You know that shift in game design that I just described? It actually goes way deeper than you might realize. Game companies aren't just throwing random purchase options at you hoping something sticks. They're meticulously crafting psychological traps tailored to different personality types. Each microtransaction targets a specific vulnerability in our brains, and developers have essentially created a psychological blueprint of what makes each of us reach for our wallets. So let me break down these microtransactions into their main categories, because understanding them is the first step to recognizing when you're being manipulated. There are three primary types that dominate the landscape. In-game currency, think V-Bucks or COD points, random chance purchases, think those infamous loot boxes, and direct in-game items. But within these categories lies a more sophisticated understanding of player psychology. Companies aren't just selling virtual goods, they're selling solutions to emotional needs you might not even realize you have. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. You and your game of choice just might be trauma bonding.
This crack shit, man, it's got me, man. I don't got no control over it, man. I try to kick, man. Shit just speak calling me. It's calling me.
Take cosmetic items, for example. That $20 skin in Fortnite or that weapon camo in Call of Duty, on the surface, they seem harmless. They don't affect gameplay, right? But cosmetics tap directly into our fundamental human desire for self-expression and social status. When you're running around with that rare skin that everybody recognizes, you're not just playing the game, you're communicating something about your identity. I've personally seen people drop hundreds of dollars on cosmetics, but not because they personally enjoy looking at them, but because of how they think others will perceive them. That's called digital peacocking. The game companies notice, and they specifically design cosmetics that create visual hierarchies so other players can instantly recognize who spent money and who hasn't. This has not only led to excessive spending, but also bullying. I know firsthand because anytime I boot up Fortnite, I am teased for still having a season 1 default character. Now, I'm an adult, so none of this bothers me. I just roll with the punches and joke back with people. But imagine being a child in this era. I've heard horror stories of children going a little too hard on one another because of the lack of skins. Now you have a toxic environment. Another aspect of microtransactions is the progression boosters, aka the time savers that let you advance faster or skip the grind. These target a completely different psychological vulnerability, our impatience and frustration tolerance. Notice how games have gradually increased their grind over the years? That's not a coincidence. By creating tedious progression systems, developers manufacture a problem they can sell you the solution to. One of the worst modern examples of this is 2017's Shadow of War, which is the sequel to the wildly popular Shadow of Mordor. Now, the game's okay for the most part, but in the final chapter, it becomes a pure grind fest when you have to take down tons of high-level enemies that you most likely are not the proper level to tackle. Now, instead of rewarding the player with the proper amount of XP for playing the game so you can level up your character, the game instead slows down the XP grind, and their solution is to constantly dangle XP boosts in your face to tempt you into spending to beat your single-player game that you already paid for. This was especially egregious because they waited until the final arc to do this. If you're 90% there, you are less likely to quit. So it's a form of manipulation to slow down the XP you gain and lock faster progression behind microtransactions in the final arc of the game. And the worst part is too, when this game came out, they patented the Nemesis system, so it was never to be seen again. And one could argue WB Games falling apart fiscally in 2025 is karma for that. But back to the topic at hand. XP boosts, level skips, resource packs, they all exploit the same psychological trigger, the pain of delayed gratification. Some players can't stand feeling held back or watching other players progress faster than them. These purchases aren't about enjoyment, they're about relieving the artificial pain points the game deliberately created. But the most psychologically manipulative type goes to loot boxes. These random chance purchases directly mimic gambling mechanics. They trigger the same neural pathways as slot machines. When you open a loot box, you're experiencing what psychologists call a variable reward schedule, one of the most effective ways to create addictive behaviors. It's the anticipation of potentially getting something rare, the flashy animations, and the near-miss experiences where you almost got the item that you wanted.
Oh no! Oh my god!
These are all deliberately engineered to trigger dopamine releases in your brain. Dopamine is a chemical our brain releases that makes us feel good. You get a dopamine release from pretty much anything, including exercise, sex, or achieving a goal, but our brain puts stopgaps in place so our body doesn't abuse this chemical. That's actually what drugs are, a substance that bypasses our body's security measures to get a constant dopamine hit. You know who else has learned how to hack and bypass those stopgaps? Casinos and game publishers. And just like casinos, when it comes to microtransactions, the odds are never in your favor, but the possibility keeps you coming back. Now, battle passes represent yet another psychological approach. These subscription-style purchases create commitment through the sunken cost fallacy. If you're unfamiliar with the sunken cost fallacy, the basic concept is that once you buy into something, you feel obligated to play more just to get your money's worth, transforming what's supposed to be leisure time into a part-time job. The time-limited nature adds to the FOMO too, because battle passes contain items you can never get again if you don't partake in the grind that you paid for. But what's fascinating is how game companies precisely target different types of players. Some of you might be familiar with the term whale, but there's actually more, and each monetization type targets different psychological profiles. And the way they're labeled, you would think these profiles were designed by Namor, so let me break them down for you so you better understand. So the smallest group of spenders is known as the guppies. They typically spend $50 a year on a game or less. The next group are known as the shrimp. These are very occasional spenders who might spend upwards of $100 per year, often making just a single purchase when they first start playing. The next group is known as minnow. These are low spenders who make occasional small purchases, typically spending up to $10 in a game or around $100 every 6 to 9 months. Next is the dolphins. These are moderate spenders who might spend $50 to $100 per month or approximately $100 every 4 to 6 months, and they represent around 0.86% of the player base. Now we're moving into the big boys. You probably heard of these ones, the whales. Whales are heavy spenders who regularly spend hundreds of dollars monthly on a game. Typically, they represent only 1 to 2% of the player base, but contribute 50 to 70% of in-app purchase revenue. And last but not least, yes, there's a level above the whale. We've got the legendary krakens, the people with no self-control. This is the highest tier of spenders. They max out on everything. These players typically spend thousands of dollars monthly, and they compromise about 0.2% of the player base. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Only 1 to 2% of gamers spend in excess, but that was all that was needed to change the business landscape of gaming forever. These profiles help executives identify that some players are immune to cosmetic temptations, but they cave for progression boosters. Others never buy power advantages, but they can't resist the gambling thrills of loot boxes. The game companies know this, which is why modern games rarely stick to just one monetization approach. They layer multiple types to ensure every player has a psychological weak point that they can exploit. And the crazy thing is, the transaction classifications go even deeper. Beyond the surface categories, there are consumables, which are items you can use and you need to repurchase, non-consumables, which are one-time purchases, and subscriptions, which are reoccurring payments. Each creates different purchasing patterns and psychological dependencies. Now let's talk about pay-to-win microtransactions specifically, because they tap into a competitor drive in a way that others don't. When a game lets you purchase purchase power, it's exploiting your desire to dominate others. The frustration of losing to someone who simply outspent you creates a powerful incentive to open your wallet. It's particularly effective because it combines two powerful motivators: competitive drive and the desire to avoid negative emotions. If you need an example, think NBA 2K. Day one, the new 2K drops, you hop in the park, you're a brown shirt, 60 overall, just trying to get some games in and grind your badges. But the problem is the park is full of stank-ass YouTubers and wannabe YouTubers and streamers who are 85, 86 overall because they purchased VC. They purchased that power. Now they're dominating you. You're getting pissed. And guess what? Now you're considering purchasing VC because you're sick of it. But the most concerning thing about these spending habits and microtransactions is it's not even evenly distributed. Industry data suggests that a tiny percentage of players, often less than 10%, account for the vast majority of the revenue. These whales, these krakens, these dolphins might spend thousands or even tens of thousands on a single game. This concentration of wealth suggests these monetization systems aren't just selling optional enhancements, they're exploiting psychological vulnerabilities in very specific individuals to an extreme degree. Basically, what these companies do is create the problem and the solution. Those whales spending thousands of dollars on games are only a part of the story. What's even darker is how game developers have literally hired psychologists to engineer frustration into your favorite games. Those progression walls you keep hitting, that's not a design flaw. That's not by accident. It's a carefully calculated trap designed to extract money from your wallet. I mean, think about it. Have you ever been in a mobile game and suddenly you hit a point where you can't progress without having to wait 24 hours? Or maybe you're in the middle of a gaming session when your energy runs out and the game helpfully suggests you can keep playing if you just spend a few bucks. This isn't random. Game companies have mastered the art of creating artificial problems just so they can sell you the solution. And mobile games are the most obvious offenders. They perfected time gates and energy systems to create complete artificial scarcity. You're not waiting 12 hours for your barn to upgrade in Farmville because it's fun. You're waiting because the developers want you to get frustrated enough to pay to skip the timer. It's like ordering food at a restaurant, then being told you have to wait 4 hours for it to arrive unless you want to pay an extra fee for priority service.
What? What the f?
What's especially manipulative is how these games gradually condition you to accept their barriers. You'll start with short wait times, right? Maybe just a minute or two. It'll get you invested in the game's loop. Then as you progress deeper, those timers stretch to hours or even days. The game knows you are emotionally invested, making you more likely to pay rather than abandon your progress. But mobile games aren't the only culprit. AAA games have also gotten in on the action. I mentioned 2K earlier, as well as Shadow of War. I can even use Diablo Immortal as an example, which is a AAA mobile game because it's designed by Blizzard. That game was deliberately designed with progression systems that create frustrating barriers to push players towards microtransactions. The deeper you got into the game, the more it introduced increasingly complex and time-consuming tasks that, surprise, can be bypassed by spending money. What's particularly insidious is how these games will deliberately calibrate difficulty spikes to maximize the likelihood that you'll make a purchase. You've been cruising along, enjoying yourself, when suddenly you'll hit a wall. The enemies get dramatically harder, resources become more scarce, and the progress just slows to a crawl. This is not poor balancing. It is psychological manipulation. The game is creating a problem, which is the frustration, and then immediately offering you a solution, which is spend your money. An example of this is Shadow of War, which I mentioned earlier in this video. That game waited to the last arc to make the game increasingly hard. You couldn't get no XP, and then it was like, hey, you want to buy some XP boost? Man, fuck that shit. And I say fuck that shit because the industry data on this is alarming. Around 6.5% of players become so used to spending money to overcome these artificial barriers that they create a consistent revenue stream for developers. That's not just a happy accident. It's an entire business model. And here's where it gets really dark. Game companies have been known to hire psychologists and sociologists specifically to engineer these addictive mechanics. They're not just creating games anymore. They're creating sophisticated psychological traps designed to manipulate your emotions and behavior. Do you remember when games used to be, I don't know, just games? Now many are designed to where you can no longer make basic progress without waiting extended periods or spending money to speed things up. It's like buying a car during the winter only to discover the manufacturer deliberately locked their heated seats behind a $20 a month subscription. Oh wait, BMW did do that. Now let's take a look at some of the before and after examples. Mobile RPGs from just a few years ago might have had cooldown timers of 5 to 10 minutes on energy refills, but today's versions of the same games have a shit ton of ads and the energy refill timers take 4 to 6 hours. And this perfectly aligns with the shortening of attention spans, by the way. A lot of people are addicted to short form content such as TikTok and YouTube Shorts these days, and that type of content has reduced attention spans to just 8 seconds. So obviously someone who can't go without doom scrolling 8 seconds isn't gonna wait 4 to 6 seconds for an energy refill. They're either gonna quit the game or they're going to pay to play. If you look at it from the publisher standpoint, that means they have a 50-50 chance of earning some cash, and that's why so many games have these small purchases nowadays. Candy Crush started with relatively fair difficulty progression, but later levels became nearly impossible to beat without boosters. These aren't design evolutions, they are calculated business decisions to extract more money from you. What's particularly effective about this approach is that it's solving a problem that creates a much stronger purchase motivation than simply enhancing an already enjoyable experience. It's the difference between selling painkillers versus vitamins. A vitamin is nice to have. I mean, it might make you healthier in the long run, but you don't feel an immediate need for those vitamins. A painkiller though, when you're in pain, you'll pay almost anything to make it stop. And that's exactly what these deliberately frustrating game designs do. They create the pain and then they sell you the relief. And it works because the relief feels justified. Your brain doesn't interpret you spending that money on something frivolous. Instead, it looks at it as you're spending it to remove an obstacle that's preventing you from having fun. The game has successfully reframed a purely optional purchase into a practical necessity. And the most troubling aspect is how these deliberately frustrating design elements can trap players into a cycle of repeated purchases. Once you've paid to overcome one barrier, you're now psychologically primed to do it again and again and again. And this can quickly develop into a form of addiction where players feel compelled to keep spending to maintain their progress or status in the game. Although I will say it's worth noting that not all in-game purchases are exploitative. Some genuinely add great value or offer meaningful content to the game. Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is a great example of this. That was a $40 piece of DLC that added 100 hours worth of great content to the game. But when a game is deliberately designed to create frustration that can only be alleviated by spending money, we've crossed from optional enhancement into psychological manipulation. Exploiting a person's mind doesn't end with frustration mechanics. It gets way darker when we look at how games hijack your brain's reward system. Did you know your brain can't actually tell the difference between a slot machine jackpot and a rare Fortnite skin reveal? It's the flashing lights, suspenseful music, and the magical moment of revelation that trigger identical neural pathways, and game studios are banking on it. Matter of fact, let's bring it back to dopamine. You know that feel-good chemical your brain releases when something exciting happens? Well, according to Dr. Luke Clark from the Center of Gambling Research, your dopamine cells fire most actively during moments of maximum uncertainty. Think about that for a second. Your brain doesn't get the biggest chemical reward when you're guaranteed something good. It gets the biggest hit when you have no idea what's coming next. That's why a random loot box drop feels better than just buying the item directly. And game developers didn't stumble onto this by accident. They've systematically studied and implemented the exact same neurological triggers that casinos perfected over the decades. The similarities between loot boxes and slot machines aren't subtle either. They're practically twins separated at birth. Both use random reward distribution, variable prize values, those frustrating near misses, and a symphony of sensory stimulation designed to keep you pulling that lever like,
Dear Diary, jackpot.
when you open a loot box, your screen explodes with color, triumphant music swells, particle effects dance across your screen, and that tantalizing moment of suspense right before the reveal, yeah, that's all deliberately engineered to maximize your dopamine response. Studies have found that this combination of auditory, haptic, and visual feedback creates genuine psychological excitement. Players have reported experiencing a literal buzz or rush when opening these digital packages. The same exact sensation gamblers describe when pulling a slot arm machine. And the most insidious part might be the near miss mechanics. You ever notice how loot box animations often slow down as they approach rare items, making it seem like you just barely missed getting something amazing? That's not a random animation. It's a calculated psychological technique. Seeing that legendary skin appear for a split second before vanishing tricks your brain into thinking you were this close to winning it big, which ironically makes you more likely to spend more than less. Your brain will register it as almost winning instead of definitely losing. But you have to understand, the odds are not stacked in your favor. Loot boxes are meticulously calibrated systems of uncertainty, anticipation, and feedback loop. Now, the probability tables aren't published for most games, but research shows they are carefully engineered to maintain engagement without giving away too much. It's that perfect balance of occasional wins to keep you hopeful, mixed in with enough losses to keep you spending money. And what's particularly concerning is how these mechanics affect our younger players. Children are significantly more vulnerable to these psychological manipulation techniques. Their still developing brains can't effectively resist these cognitive triggers the way adult brains can. And that's because of the prefrontal cortex. It's responsible for impulse impulse control and decision making, and that isn't fully formed until you're about 25. That's why the World Health Organization has formally recognized gaming and loot box addiction as a legitimate mental health concern, classifying them both as ICD-11 and DSM-5. I mean, let me paint a picture of how sophisticated these systems have become. When you open a loot box in a modern game, you're not seeing just a random animation. Every aspect has been tested and refined. The gradual reveal, the pulsing glow around rare items, the dramatic pause before showing what you got. It's all designed to maximize that dopamine release. Game designers literally study casino psychology for the millionth time to make these experiences as addictive as possible. And the wild part is that the research suggests frequent loot box purchasing can actually be more strongly correlated with problem gambling symptoms than traditional gambling games like slot machines or online betting. Think about that for a second. The digital box in your favorite game might be more psychologically manipulative than actual casino games designed explicitly for gambling. The entire opening sequence is a masterclass in sensory manipulation. First, there's anticipation as you select the box. Then there's the building excitement as the opening animation begins. The sound gets louder, the lights flash faster, and everything crescendos to the moment of revelation. Your brain is being taken on a carefully orchestrated neurochemical journey with every box that you open. And the funny part is that these companies try to argue these systems are just surprise mechanics that create fun and excitement, not gambling. But when you look at the research, what they're really selling isn't the digital item inside, it's the dopamine hit itself. The psychological reward becomes more valuable than the actual reward itself. That's why so many players describe feeling let down after the excitement of opening boxes passes, regardless of what they receive. And the most disturbing part is that these systems are designed to be particularly effective on certain personality types. Just like casinos know which players are most likely to develop gambling problems, game companies can identify which players are most susceptible to loot box addiction through data analysis. The very players who are most vulnerable to these psychological triggers are the ones most aggressively targeted. So I think it's important I touch on how virtual money fools you. Game companies didn't just borrow the dopamine triggers from casinos, they also copied their most brilliant financial trick. Have you ever noticed how when you drop 1,200 gems on a digital sword, your brain doesn't register as it being $15 of actual money spent? This psychological distance isn't by accident. It's a deliberate design choice that game developers have perfected to separate you from your cash. Cause let's be real here for a second. If you walked into a store and you saw a virtual outfit priced at $20, you'd probably think twice before buying. But when that same outfit costs 2,000 V-Bucks, suddenly the math gets fuzzy and the purchase feels less consequential. That's exactly the point. Game companies know that once your real dollars are converted into colorful digital tokens, your brain perceives them as less valuable. This trick has been extensively studied. Research shows that players experience significantly less psychological pain when spending virtual currencies compared to real-world money. It's the same reason casinos use chips instead of having you play with actual dollar bills on the table. Because once that conversion happens, your brain's financial warning system gets short-circuited like... What makes this even more effective is the intentional use of confusing exchange rates. Have you ever noticed how games rarely use one-to-one conversions? Instead of making 100 gems equal $1, they'll make it something awkward like 83 gems equals 99 cents. These odd rates make it nearly impossible to quickly calculate what you're actually spending in real-world terms. So by the time you pull out a calculator, your impulse is already won. And because of that, the only positive thing to ever come out of this system is the fact that 1,600 Microsoft points cost $20. Now, why does that matter? Because without those 1,600 Microsoft point gift cards, we would have never got the classic.
As you all read on players, my friend told me to type for G lobby, it's 1,600 Microsoft points. Message me back if you're interested. Yeah, that's it.
And that's just the beginning of the currency shell game. I mean, many modern titles have introduced multiple layers of currency. You got gems that convert to coins, coins that convert to tickets, and tickets that finally convert to items that maybe you'll want. And each conversion further obscures the real world value and creates additional psychological distance from your actual bank account. FIFA Ultimate Team is notorious for this. It forces players through a maze of FIFA points, coins, and card packs that makes tracking your spending nearly impossible. And the most diabolical part is the fact that currency bundles almost never align with item prices. Need 1,000 gems for that character skin? Sorry, but the store only sells them in packs of 850 or 1738. This clever mismatch ensures that you always have leftover currency. It'll be just enough to tempt you towards another purchase, but not enough to buy anything worthwhile without having to spend more money on gems. It's like a grocery store that only sells hot dogs in a pack of 8, but it only sells buns in packs of 6. You're gonna always need to buy more to avoid wasting your glizzies. Mobile games have perfected this dark art. I mean, take a look at Candy Crush or Clash Royale, where the currency bundles and prices are meticulously designed to leave you with an awkward amount amount of leftover gems. This isn't sloppy design. It's calculated to create what psychologists call the incomplete ownership effect, where leftover currency creates a sense of unfinished business that nags you until you spend more money. The Entertainment Software Rating Board has actually raised concerns about these practices. They've recommended that publishers enhance purchase disclosures by providing consumers with meaningful information about real money costs. But the industry has been slow to adopt transparent pricing, and for obvious reasons. I mean, studies indicate that players spend up to 2 to 3 times more when using abstract currencies versus seeing direct dollar amounts. And what's particularly concerning is the fact that most players don't even realize what's happening. Research shows a staggering 98% of participants in one study were completely unaware of how their spending was being manipulated through these currency systems. Game companies are literally banking on your ignorance, and some of the most egregious examples come from games targeted at younger audiences. You've got Roblox's Robux system, Fortnite's V-Bucks, and mobile games where their gems and diamonds all create an environment where kids especially struggle to understand the true value of what they're spending. The FTC has even launched investigations into how these games disclose or fail to disclose the actual cost of gameplay. But even players who consider themselves financially savvy fall for these tricks from time to time. And that's because systems aren't just exploiting math confusion, they're targeting deeper cognitive weaknesses in how humans process abstract values. When you're in the middle of an intense gaming session, your emotional brain is in the driver's seat, and that part of your brain is terrible at converting 1738 gems back into $25 on the fly. So next time you're about to purchase some virtual currency, pause for a moment and force yourself to calculate the actual dollar amount. Ask yourself if you'd still make that purchase if the price tag showed real money instead of colorful coins. This simple mental exercise can be surprisingly effective at breaking the psychological distance these systems are designed to create. But I also will admit, it doesn't help the fact that these companies also tap into the power of peer pressure. Even the most calculated money-saving gamer will eventually face an opponent more formidable than any in-game boss, and I'm talking about social pressure. That countdown timer on a limited edition skin isn't just creating urgency, it's weaponizing your social nature against your wallet. Those digital status symbols aren't random products, they're carefully engineered social triggers designed to make you spend when your willpower alone would have easily said no. And gaming companies have mastered the art of making you feel like an outsider if you don't join the spending party. But let's be real, gaming isn't just about playing games anymore, it's about belonging. When that new Valorant skin collection drops, it's not just about how cool the gun skins look, it's about the reaction you get when you pull them out during a match. You'll hear something like, "Damn, I see you with that skin, you got that shit on," and that from a teammate hit different, don't it? That brief moment of recognition creates a social hierarchy where your digital possessions determine your standing. Game companies know this and deliberately design their ecosystems to maximize this effect. Take Fortnite's approach to limited time cosmetics. When a rare skin like the Galaxy or the Black Knight appears in your lobby, it immediately communicates something about that player. It could be their dedication, their OG status, or simply their willingness to spend. These aren't just random designs, they're carefully crafted status symbols that create visible distinctions between players. And let's not pretend we don't notice them. The game's third-person perspective literally forces you to stare at your own skin the entire time you play, while also parading it around in front of others. Y'all have to understand that the social ecosystem in these games is not by accident. It's an engineered economy of status. Games deliberately build social comparison mechanisms that encourage spending by making purchased items more predominantly visible. You might think you're immune to this kind of influence, but seeing your entire squad dressed as Ninja Turtles in Fortnite and you're the only one not dressed as a Ninja Turtle can lead to a special kind of FOMO that hits different, and sometimes that can even lead to bullying, as I stated earlier. And speaking of FOMO, that's where limited time events come into play. Those 72-hour special events aren't short because the developers are lazy. They're strategically designed to trigger emotional responses like excitement and anxiety. That countdown timer on a rare skin collection creates an artificial deadline that disables your normal decision-making process. Suddenly, you're not thinking about whether you need that skin, you're panicking about never being able to get it again. I mean, think about it. How many times have you bought something in a game not because you desperately wanted it, but because you were afraid of missing out on that window? That's not a coincidence. It's calculated psychological manipulation. Limited time events exploit your fear of missing out to compel purchases that you probably would have skipped if given the proper time to consider. And it works especially well because you're not just missing out on the item, you're missing out on a social experience. When everyone in your Discord is talking about that epic limited time raid or showing off their exclusive reward, not participating creates real social exclusion. The cosmetic items from these events function as badges that signal "I was there" to the community, and the exclusivity creates prestige that goes beyond the digital pixels, so if you don't partake in that, you're now left out of the conversation. Sprinkle in the fact that some people have made gaming their entire personality, and the consequences can become tenfold. What makes this particularly effective is how these tactics target young players. Teenagers and young adults are neurologically more susceptible to peer influence because they desperately seek social validation. They're still developing prefrontal cortex makes resisting these pressures significantly harder. And the game companies know exactly that, and that's why when they design these systems, it's designed designed to leverage young players' heightened social awareness. Now let's talk about the streamers and YouTubers and other type of content creators because they amplify this effect. When your favorite YouTuber spends $500 on loot boxes or showcases every skin in a new collection, they're normalizing high spending patterns. You'll watch them celebrate getting an ultra rare drop, and suddenly spending $20 on a chance to get something yourself doesn't seem that crazy. These influencers, often unknowingly, serve as powerful marketing tools that validate excessive spending, and they showcase the social capital that comes with getting rare items. But the worst offenders are the creators that don't care about any of this because the only thing that matters to them is that almighty dollar. They will spend years building up trust with their young audience, only to turn around and promote the very things that harm them in exchange for a paycheck and a little bit of clout. What I find fascinating is how the social dynamics in the gaming community mirror real-world consumer behavior, but just on steroids. In real life, yeah, you might occasionally see someone with some new shoes or a new watch, but in a video game, everything you own is constantly on display, creating a 24/7 social comparison machine. The digital nature of these items also makes them function as a perfect status symbol. They have zero production costs after creation. They can be made artificially scarce, and they're designed specifically to be noticeable and impressive to others. The genius of the system is that it creates a self-perpetuating cycle. Players spend to gain status, which normalizes spending for others, who then spend to keep up, raising the bar for everyone else, and before you know it, dropping $20 on a skin feels like the standard and not an exception. The social ecosystem becomes an arm race where the house always wins. I'm not saying we should never buy cosmetics or participate in limited time events again. Hell, I'm guilty of spending money on microtransactions myself. Some of these purchases genuinely enhance our experiences, but we should recognize when our decisions are being driven by social pressure or engineered by different types of algorithms versus actual desire for the item itself, especially considering the fact that the average gamer is 35 years old. It's time for some of y'all to start acting y'all age by exercising some self-control. It is no reason, and I stand on this, if there's anything you take from this fucking video, it's no reason for anyone to be spending thousands of dollars on an annual sports game. So I encourage everyone, the next time you feel the urgent need to buy something in a game, ask yourself, do I want this because I truly like it, or do I want it because I'm afraid of what others might think if I don't have it? And if you don't know the answer to that question, well, that's how you end up falling for it. The commitment trap. That $10 battle pass sitting in your game menu is not just another purchase option. It's actually a commitment contract designed to hijack your decision making. See, when Fortnite revolutionized the battle pass system in 2017, they weren't just creating a new monetization method, they were tapping into one of the most powerful psychological biases that keeps players logging in even if they're no longer having fun. And because of it, battle passes have since become the dominant monetization strategy across virtually every genre of game. We're talking from shooters to MOBAs to even single player games like the recently released Assassin's Creed Shadows. That tiered reward track with the premium unlock has become as standard as the settings in a game's menu. But why have developers universally embraced this model? The answer isn't just about steady revenue, it's about what happens to your brain after you make that initial purchase. So let's break down what actually happens when you buy a battle pass. You're not purchasing content, you're signing up for a part-time job. See, the typical battle pass lasts between 30 and 45 days, with most settling around the 30-day sweet spot. This isn't a random time frame, it's carefully calibrated to align with monthly user engagement and spending habits. During this period, you're expected to complete a series of challenges, tasks, and gameplay objectives to progress through anywhere from 10 to 200 levels, with 30 levels being the industry standard for optimal balance between progress and attainability. What makes this system so psychologically powerful is that it transforms your relationship with the game. Before purchasing a battle pass, you play because you wanted to, you played for fun. After buying one, you play because you feel you have to. And this is the commitment trap in action. Once you've invested that initial $10, your brain starts working against you through what psychologists call the sunken cost fallacy. Friendly reminder, the sunken cost fallacy is our tendency to continue an endeavor once we've invested resources into it, even when continuing it no longer benefits us. Your brain essentially tells you, I paid for this battle pass, so I need to make sure I get my money's worth. This creates a powerful psychological obligation loop that keeps you grinding challenges at 2 a.m. on a work night, and it transforms what was supposed to be fun leisure time into a part-time job. And game developers understand this psychological mechanism and deliberately design their battle passes to exploit it. You ever notice how the first 5 to 10 levels of any battle pass are incredibly easy to obtain? That's not generosity, it's a calculated onboarding strategy. Those quick early rewards create a surge of dopamine and a sense of progress that hooks you into the system. But the difficulty curve isn't linear, it's exponential. So by the final third act of most battle passes, you'll need to invest significantly more time to unlock each of the levels. And ladies and gentlemen, that's how we go from things being incredibly fun to
Day is never finished. Master got me working. Someday Master set me free.
In many battle passes, you might earn the first 10 rewards in just a few hours of casual play, but those final 10 levels, they might require 3 to 4 times as much gameplay. This isn't poor design, it's deliberate psychological engineering to create a sense of sunken cost fallacy that compels you to keep playing even as the fun factor diminishes. And the time-limited nature of battle passes adds another layer of psychological pressure. That countdown timer isn't just informational, it's a stress-inducing mechanism designed to create anxiety. As the timer winds down, your brain begins calculating whether you'll complete all levels in time. This creates what psychologists call anticipatory regret. It's basically you start feeling bad about potentially missing rewards that you've technically already paid for, but you have yet earned. And this is where battle passes reveal their true brilliance from a business perspective. They've managed to monetize not just your desire for in-game items, but your fear of waste and incompletion. The battle pass exploits completionist tendencies by presenting a clear visual representation of what you earn versus what you stand to lose if you don't claim. The rewards themselves are carefully structured to manipulate player psychology. Battle passes typically include a mix of cosmetic items, in-game currencies, boosts, and occasional loot boxes or characters. But the most desirable items, the ones showcased in all the marketing materials like the YouTube trailers and the tweets, they're usually placed at the highest levels, requiring the most significant time investment. Some games even offer premium battle pass tiers that cost extra, creating multiple layers of commitment and potential sunken cost fallacy. This system creates what psychologists call a compulsion loop, a cycle of anticipation, rewards, and continued engagement that keeps players locked into a constant state of reward seeking. Your dopamine systems get stimulated by the incremental progression and the potential for exciting rewards, making it difficult to break away even when the gameplay itself has become a chore. And to be 100% honest, I've experienced this myself with games like Apex Legends. I remember grinding for hours to complete those daily, weekly, and monthly challenges for some legendary skin on a character that I didn't even play, so I almost never used in game. But I couldn't stop because I had already invested in that battle pass. That thought of leaving those final rewards on the table felt physically uncomfortable, which is a perfect example of how these systems transform entertainment into obligation. It's actually one of the reasons why I quit the game. I mean, outside of it getting boring after playing it just for a couple years, I got sick of the fact that I couldn't get enough materials from the battle pass to make any heirlooms, so eventually I gave up. The ethical concerns here are significant, especially when these mechanics target younger players who may not fully understand psychological manipulation at work. Battle passes effectively teach children that leisure activities should be approached with a productivity mindset. They teach that games aren't about enjoyment, but about maximizing return on their investment. And that is what's made battle passes particularly insidious. They've normalized this transformation of play into work. Many players now evaluate games not by how much fun they are, but how worth it the battle pass grind might be. We've accepted a system where paying for content isn't enough. We must also labor to unlock what we've already purchased, and they're going to make sure you purchase it because every game comes with some form of personalized manipulation. Behind the colorful interfaces and fun mechanics lies something far more invasive. It's a sophisticated surveillance operation that would make intelligence agencies jealous. While battle passes openly show you the grind ahead, there's an entirely different system running silently in the background, calculating your every move with cold precision. I don't know if you noticed or not, but yeah, that special discount offer that appears right after you lose 3 matches in a row, yeah, that's not a coincidence. It's a product of an algorithm that's been studying your emotional patterns more closely than your therapist. Game companies aren't just tracking what you buy, they're tracking everything you do and then building a psychological profile that can predict your spending triggers with frightening accuracy. And the scale of this data collection is mind-blowing. Modern games are collecting over 50,000 data points about your gameplay habits. They know how long you play, when you play, who you play with, how often you win and lose, which items you inspect in the store, how long you hover over the purchase button, even the millisecond delays in your decision making. Now, all this information feeds massive databases that power increasingly sophisticated AI systems designed for one purpose, and that's to separate you from your money. And what's particularly concerning is how this data gets transformed into what experts call inferred data. These are conclusions about your personality, emotional states, and vulnerabilities that you never explicitly share. Games might categorize you as impulsive, completionist, or socially motivated based on your behavior pattern, and then use these labels to craft personalized manipulation strategies. The industry even has a disturbing taxonomy for players based on their spending habits. They sort us into minnows, dolphins, whales, and krakens, and those krakens and whales make up only 1% of players players, but contribute a staggering 50 to 70% of total game revenue. Once you're identified as a potential whale or kraken, the manipulation intensifies dramatically. Matter of fact, you know Activision, the company behind Call of Duty, they actually patented matchmaking systems specifically designed to encourage microtransactions. One patent describes a system that deliberately matches junior players with expert players who have desirable items, basically showing off cool gear to create envy and trigger purchases. The patent literally spells out how to manipulate players. In this manner, the junior player may be encouraged to make game-related purchases such as weapons, armors, or other items to increase their chances of winning. This kind of manipulation is becoming increasingly personalized in what the industry is calling nano-targeting. This is creating experiences and monetization strategies tailored to individual players. It's why some players might see higher prices in the store than others for the same item, or why certain offers appear for some players but not for others. The system is constantly running experiments on you to determine your price sensitivity and your psychological triggers. To make matters worse, technology is advancing faster than transparency or regulation. Yeah, the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation represents a step forward protecting users' data, but even those robust regulations struggle to keep pace with how AI processes player information. When an algorithm makes decisions based on thousands of data points run through neural networks, even the developers themselves might not fully understand why it's targeting you specifically. I mean, think about it. When's the last time you felt like the game was reading your mind? Maybe an offer for exactly what you wanted appeared right when you were about to quit playing the game due to frustration. That wasn't luck. It was surveillance capitalism at work. The system noticed your engagement was dropping, it predicted you might leave, and it deployed a targeted ad based on your previous behavior to pull you back in. Children are especially vulnerable to these tactics. Many games popular with young people collect massive amounts of sensitive info without adequate transparency or consent processes. And parents have no idea that when their kids log into Fortnite or Roblox, sophisticated data collection systems are building detailed profiles of their behavior, potentially tracking them across multiple platforms. Some publishers even have partnerships with data brokers that can link your gaming profile with your broader digital footprint. Yeah, they got your social media activity, shopping habits, and even your credit score. And all this information helps them refine their targeting and identify the most profitable pressure points. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The AI knows whether or not you are a So the real question is now, how do we respond to this level of manipulation? As games become more sophisticated in targeting individuals, traditional consumer protections fall short. Regulations that were designed for television commercials don't adequately address AI systems that adapt in real time to exploit your personal vulnerability. Well, I say the first step is awareness. Understanding that these systems exist and recognizing that they're being deployed against you will go a long way. That limited time offer that appears after you just lost, now you're emotionally primed, yeah, that wasn't a lucky opportunity. It's an algorithm exploiting your vulnerability so they can get you to spend more money. Understanding psychological manipulation is your best defense. When you do, that's when you have real power as a consumer. And here's something interesting. Not all game developers are embracing these manipulative models. An example being this guy.
Fuck the Oscars, you know? Fuck the Oscars!
A recent example of this is Marvel Rivals. I love the way they're handling the battle pass. When you purchase it, you don't have to complete it during the season it was released. The game gives you the option to complete it at your own pace, so if life gets in the way, you know your items you paid for will still be there. I hope more studios and publishers take note of the positive response their battle passes got and adjust accordingly. Now, on the single player side of things, you got games like the recently released Split Fiction, which is fire, by the way. You know the fuck the Oscars guy that I just mentioned earlier? Yeah, he's on the dev team for Split Fiction, and he has proudly professed in a recent interview that his games will never have microtransactions. We're also seeing consumer protection organizations stepping up, calling for regulatory oversight over microtransactions, especially ones that target kids. They're pushing back against the psychological manipulation that we've been discussing throughout this entire video. An example being the European Union recently announced they would be taking action against the use of virtual currencies to disguise the price of microtransactions. They're calling for clear and transparent pricing info, which basically means if a skin costs $10, it needs to be listed as so in order to be in compliance. I think this stuff helps, but at the end of the day, it's also about making conscious choices. So the next time you're about to drop cash on a shiny new skin, please ask yourself, do I genuinely want this, or am I responding to carefully engineered pressure? Remember, there's nothing wrong with supporting games that you love. I just want to make sure that you're doing it on your terms and not theirs. Now, if you made it this far into the video, I'd like to say thank you, and please remember to hit the like button. I'm also thinking about using this whole dark psychology topic to dive deeper into more specific games and their sinister business practices. So if you want to see the dark psychology of something like, I don't know, Madden, Overwatch 2K, or any other game with microtransactions, please provide some feedback in the comment section below. Once you're done with that, do me a favor and peep the card on the screen. I recently did a video on the rise, fall, and rebirth of boxing video games and how that's affected the video game landscape. If that sounds like your cup of tea, do me a favor, tap the card on the screen and check out my video on the undisputed way boxing games have cheated death.